I know some of you, not all of you. My name is State Representative Lauren Carson, and I represent part of Newport. And I'm here this evening with my two wonderful House colleagues, Terri Cortvriend and Deb Ruggiero. And we've been working, the three of us are dedicated environmentalists and have addressed climate change during the course of our tenure in the House of Representatives. And we've been working to build a climate awareness on the island. And so this evening we'll be on this Zoom meeting for about an hour, and we're going to focus on some energy related issues. And I want to welcome everyone. I'm going to turn it over to Terri, who's going to tell you a little bit about the work we've done with the Climate Caucus in the past. Terri?
Good evening. Yes, thanks for joining us. I'm Terri Cortvriend. I'm the state representative for the southern part of Portsmouth and the eastern edge of Middletown. And I'm glad you're all here tonight. Lauren and I started and Deb has joined in. We started the Climate Caucus after the last year's session, pre-COVID, when we were out of frustration of seeing no environmental bills be passed in the House. And we had several in-person meetings. This is the first time we've tried a Zoom meeting, but we had great attendance at several meetings, which we did all across the island, at the Middletown Library. I think we met in Newport, and we met at the Portsmouth Library, and we got feedback of what people wanted to hear about. Our first meeting was on sea level rise, and we had Grover Fugate from CRMC, who is now since retired, but we wanted to catch him before his retirement, and he did a wonderful presentation on sea level rise. And the other topic that people were interested in learning more about was reducing our carbon footprint. And so that's why we're here tonight. And we're going to hear about what policies have taken place in Rhode Island, where we're going and where we've been. And with that, I would like to turn it over to my colleague, Deb Ruggiero, who's got a very strong background in these and has been a mentor to me. And I've enjoyed working with her, and she's got a long history on this topic.
Thank you. Thank you, Rep. Cortvriend, and I want to thank Rep. Carson and Terri for the work they've done. It's such an honor to have such great environmental stewards to work with at the State House. And I want to thank you for joining us tonight. I'm looking forward to a very energizing conversation. I've had the honor of representing the people of District 74, which is Jamestown and Middletown, first running in 2008 on a platform of environmental economics, when people said, what is that? And I said, it's putting wind and solar and energy efficiency at the forefront of economic development. And with the help with a lot of the environmental groups in the state, we framed the state's renewable energy laws, taking Rhode Island from what I would call a laggard in 2011 to a leader by 2017. And I share that because that's the power of policy and community activism. And now we pivot to the climate crisis. And as my colleagues mentioned, you know, we've all sponsored the Act on Climate in 2020, and we really need to get this over the goal line in 2021. The climate crisis is not only an environmental issue, but it's a public health issue, and it's an economic development issue. So tonight's forum, which is Rhode Island Energy Policy, Reducing Carbon Emissions, features two very knowledgeable and capable environmental advocates that we've had the pleasure of working with, not only at the State House, but also in the community. They do a terrific job. I'd like to introduce you to Kai Salem. She's the policy coordinator for the Green Energy Consumers Alliance, and our other guest speaker tonight, Sue AnderBois, the Climate and Energy Program Manager for the Nature Conservancy. So thank you both for your policy work. Thank you for joining us, and welcome.
Thank you so much for having us. So first, we really want to thank Representatives Carson, Cortvriend, and Ruggiero for hosting this. Kai and I are really excited to be here with you. And thank you so much for your leadership on climate, energy, and environmental issues at the State House. So Kai and I are going to talk a little bit about policy for a low carbon future. And if I can get my slides to move, there we go. So I'm Sue AnderBois. I'm with the Nature Conservancy, which I'll talk about in a second, but a few logistics. So first, everyone should be muted to start, just to avoid any unexpected background noise. We're going to ask if folks can put any questions they have in the chat box, and we'll check in on the chat box and ask for questions towards the end. And Donna will be helping us with that. Our contact information is both on this slide and the last slide, so we hope that you follow up with us at some point if you want to continue talking. And this webinar is being recorded. So Kai.
Hi everyone, thank you so much to Reps Cortvriend, Ruggiero, and Carson for being climate champions and for hosting this today, as well as the other work with the Climate Caucus. I am the policy coordinator at Green Energy Consumers Alliance. I also work with representatives in my role as the policy chair for the Environment Council of Rhode Island, which is the umbrella environmental organization in the state. Green Energy Consumers Alliance is a nonprofit that has been around for many decades in Massachusetts and now 18 years in Rhode Island. We were founded as an oil buying co-op, which means that we've always been grounded in energy affordability and accessibility for people in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. But over the last couple of decades, our work really has pivoted towards green energy and sustainability because the climate crisis is the greatest challenge of our time. I work on the advocacy side of things, advancing policies that get us to that low carbon future. We also have a number of programs, which I might mention later, that help individuals make green energy choices in their own homes and their own lives.
Great. So I am with the Nature Conservancy. For those of you not familiar with the Nature Conservancy, we are a global nonprofit with a presence in all 50 states and almost 80 countries around the world. And our mission is to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends. And we really realize that you cannot do that without addressing the climate crisis. So in recent years have really pivoted to include both our traditional conservation, land and water conservation work, but now also to really include a really strong focus on climate change prevention, mitigation, and adaptation. So I live and work here in Rhode Island in the house that's behind me with the solar that was installed by Doug Sabetti on this call. And I'm our climate and energy program manager. So I'm just going to jump right in. As folks on this call already know, in Rhode Island, we are already feeling the effects of climate change in a variety of different ways. And likely if you're joining this call this evening, you already really understand the reality of climate change and acknowledge that. But some of the ways that it really manifests here in Rhode Island include things like sea level rise, warming air temperature, warming waters, more frequent and more intense storms, changing in biodiversity, and more precipitation and inland flooding. And this is a slide that we borrowed with permission from the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank's Resilient Rhody program led by Sean O'Rourke. And this is a photo of some flooding that happened in 2010 in Westerly, so you can see that. But some photos that are a little closer to your home, we can see here how it lands in Rhode Island. Over the last 50 years, surface water temperatures in the bay have increased between 2.5 and almost 3 degrees Fahrenheit. And winter water temperatures are increasing even more. Air temperatures have increased by more than 3 degrees Fahrenheit since the beginning of the 20th century, and 2016 was the warmest year on record across the whole globe. And a photo that I'm sure many of you on the call recognize, we're here in front of the Siemens Church Institute. Intense rainfall events have increased significantly since 1958. We've seen great increases in annual precipitation, more than 10 inches since the 30s, as well as sea level rise along the same scale. And just to say all this to point out that this is happening in measurable ways and not in subtle ways. These are things we can measure. Senator Whitehouse often says these are things we can measure with yardsticks and thermometers. Like, this is not, subtle minor changes. These are things we can see now. But Kai and I really want to present more of a hopeful stance. So something that we want to say is there is good news, and we do know what to do to prevent and to adapt to climate change. And so we have this kind of three-part framework. We're going to hone in on one of them, but touch briefly on the other. So the way to address climate change really is to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, remove emissions from the atmosphere, and adapt to unavoidable changes. It sounds really simple when you say it like that. Removing emissions can involve a suite of different policies and programs, but includes things like land preservation and urban tree planting, where we utilize trees, open space, and greenery as both carbon sequestration, so holding on to or taking carbon and greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere, as well as storage. So keeping that land in green spaces to hold the carbon in the trees and in the soils. Adaptation can take many forms, and this is something I think the island is particularly familiar with. So it could be things like green infrastructure. We need to adapt our shorelines, for example. The picture on the left is a recent installation of what we call a living shoreline at the Rose Larissa Park, which is actually in East Providence. And we also need to do more coordinated climate change resilience planning. So the picture on the right is a facilitator named Jen Fox, who helps with the Municipal Resilience Program, which is a partnership between the Nature Conservancy and the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank, where we help communities, including all 3 of the communities on the island, on Aquidneck Island, who have opted in to participate, plan for infrastructure changes and things that they'll need to adapt to climate change. But we're going to primarily focus this presentation on the first piece of that framework, which is reducing our carbon emissions, and the role that clean energy and energy in general plays in the reduction of our greenhouse gas emissions. And our overall goal, and Representative Ruggiero also already mentioned this, but is to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions in line with what the current science says, which is to make it entirely reduce them down to 0 by the year 2050. A bill was introduced this last year, which would have done just that. It's called the Act on Climate Bill, and it would have reduced our emissions to net 0 in line with the latest science in a way that was mandatory and economy-wide. So this would really update the Resilient Rhode Island Act, which was passed in 2014. And so we're really hopeful that this could happen hopefully next year. The good news is that we actually, as we already said, we know many of the policies we need to get there, particularly here on the energy side. And this slide is a representation of where our carbon emissions in Rhode Island come from. So where our major emitting sectors are. And so you see it from across transportation, electric consumption, residential heating and industry, commercial heating, and we're going to focus in on also including natural gas distribution. So a little bit skipping on waste for today. And we're going to keep this discussion at a fairly high level just for time considerations, but during Q&A, we're happy to dig in on any details, and we're also happy to dig in on any details afterward as well. So I'll start with transportation, which, as you can see, accounts for more than 1/3 of our annual greenhouse gas emissions. And transportation includes, our car traffic, our vehicles traveled within the states. That's both like passenger vehicles, like you or I might drive, if we were going anywhere these days, as well as trucks and a teeny little slice from public transportation. And the types of policies we need to get us to 0 carbon include increased incentives and charging infrastructure for electric vehicles across the state to make it easier to switch from traditional cars to a new fleet of cars, improvements and expansion, as well as electrifying our public transportation system or public transit system, as well as passing policies like, for example, the Transportation and Climate Initiative, which is a regional policy that would create a funding mechanism for investments in clean transportation, clean transit, as well as things like bikeability and walkability. In some areas, we're talking about funds like this also helping to improve access to things like broadband, so just replacing transportation options altogether so that people can better learn and work from home. So things like that, those types of policies that reduce our dependence on traditional cars for transportation. So I'm going to turn over to Kai to talk about the next ones.
Thank you so much, Sue. Really great overview of everything so far. So the secret to decarbonization across all of these sectors, the 3 big ones, transportation, heating, and electricity, is through the electric sector, because transportation and heating primarily runs on gasoline, propane, fuel oil, natural gas, of course. There's some biomass in the heating sector. There's a whole variety of fuels in the heating sector. And none of those things can be carbon free. So we need to electrify our transportation sectors and our heating sectors so that we can make our transportation and heating run on solar and wind the way that we can make our lights and electric appliances run on solar and wind. So although electricity is actually the third biggest of those three big sectors right now, it looks like the second biggest on these slides because it doesn't group together the heating, the residential heating and the commercial heating and the industrial heating. Although electricity is currently the third biggest sector of fossil fuel emissions in our state, it's going to become even bigger as we electrify the other sectors. So we need to do everything we can to get carbon out of our electric supply. The fundamental policy, of course, is always energy efficiency. The best way to reduce fossil fuels from our energy systems is by reducing the amount of energy that we use overall. Energy efficient appliances and improving the efficiency of our buildings, as well as improving the efficiency of our cars, saves money for consumers. It means we're spending less on fuel, often at the exact same cost. Often an efficient appliance is just as inexpensive as a non-efficient appliance. And we're also reducing the amount of energy we need overall and the amount of electricity infrastructure we need. Second, back in January, the governor signed the 100% renewable electricity executive order, which was really exciting to see. That executive order kicked off a planning process to consider how we might create a 100% renewable electricity system by 2030. As advocates, though, we're saying that we already know how to get to that goal, and we should be implementing everything we can as soon as possible to get to this achievable 100% renewable electricity by 2030 goal. The way we do that is by passing a 100% renewable energy standard. The renewable energy standard is a policy that we've had in Rhode Island for a long time. They have renewable energy standards all across the country, and that requires electric utilities in the state to buy an increasing amount of their electricity from renewable sources over time. And remind me, Rep. Ruggiero, were you involved in the passage of this at any point?
Rep. Ruggiero was our champion.
Rep. Ruggiero was the champion. Incredible.
We certainly did frame some of that, and working with Office of Energy Resources and some environmental groups. Yes, but it's fabulous that you're talking about it. Let's just get it done by 2030.
So let's get that done. And as part of that process, we're going to need more offshore wind. We have contracted 400 megawatts so far, in addition to our incredible deep water wind project. But right now we're behind. Massachusetts just passed a law to contract 2,400 megawatts. So we can do even better and move further towards our goals of 100% renewable electricity. We do that as soon as possible because getting offshore wind from the contracting stage to the in the ground and built stage takes a very long time. And of course, we need to support our solar industry. We want to see more solar on rooftops. We want to see more solar on brownfields and developed lands. So as we support our renewable energy incentive programs, like the Renewable Energy Growth Program, another program that Rep. Ruggiero was instrumental in passing, we also need to make sure that solar is not being overdeveloped in our most important environmental areas. And on heating, we have some of the same strategies as with electricity. With heating, energy efficiency is once again a fundamental strategy. We need to weatherize and insulate our homes so that we're not leaking all of that energy into the atmosphere out of our very old housing stock here in Rhode Island in the most part. Net zero building codes and standards can work under the radar to reduce the amount of energy that we need for our homes. And again, we need to electrify our heating systems. On Aquidneck Island, I'm guessing many of the people on this call lost natural gas in the natural gas outage about a year and a half ago. So we know that natural gas.
Oop, Kai, you're cutting out.
Not the end-all be-all solution. Electric heat is an expensive market, and supporting people who are interested in electrifying their buildings. And to recap all of that, here are the big four policies that we are thinking about as energy and climate advocates to set the framework, get the ball rolling on getting to net zero by 2050. Number one, set those mandatory emissions targets so that we can keep our administration and our agencies accountable to our renewable energy goals. Number two, pass and implement the 100% by 2030 renewable electricity standard. We need to extend and strengthen energy efficiency programs because they are so fundamental and cost effective for the consumer. And finally, implement
Kai cut out, but she's saying that we should implement the Transportation and Climate Initiative, which we mentioned earlier was the regional policy that would help us invest in clean transportation initiatives. And I'll take us to the next slide, which is, you know, we're talking about a number of different policies, and we talked about a lot of different changes that we're seeing here in Rhode Island due to climate change, but our message continues to be clear that, you know, while it might seem like this is a problem that's too big, we know what to do, and there are things that we can do right this moment. There are ways that we can act right now at all different levels. And so that action can take the place, that can take the form of individual action, that can be community scale action and collective action, and that could also be state policy. And so we're gonna talk a little bit about each one of these buckets, starting with individual actions.
Yes, so I know that for me personally, I, like many people on this call, probably have a lot of climate anxiety. The way that I deal with it is by making sure that my own carbon footprint is as green as can be, and also working on this kind of state policy collective action. So to identify some of the options that we have, Green Energy Consumers has in Rhode Island for individual action, you can green up your home energy with rooftop solar, or you can consider buying renewable electricity through a program like Green Powered. Many of the towns on Aquidneck Island are also going through a municipal aggregation process that I'll talk about on a couple of slides, which will also allow you to access cheap renewable electricity. Consider buying or leasing an electric car for your next car. We have a Drive Green program. Drive Green helps provide discounts on electric vehicles, as well as lots of more information. Investing in efficiency. So it is a pandemic right now, and we don't necessarily want energy efficiency workers coming through your own home. You might not be comfortable with that, to get energy efficiency audits. There are virtual home energy audits that have actually proven to be very accurate so far. And there's also some crazy discounts on the energy efficiency programs. For example, weatherization is 100% covered up to like $15,000 through the National Grid programs right now. So it's a great time to check out National Grid's efficiency programs on their website. Finally, it's really important to just keep talking about climate and the importance of strong political leadership, like the leaders on this call, with friends and family and neighbors, because we do need that policy to get it done.
Thanks, Kai. I'm getting a little feedback. I apologize. I'm just going to take us to the next piece, but pick up where Kai left off about talking about climate. I agree with Kai that I also feel a fair amount of climate anxiety. And the Nature Conservancy has a program called Let's Talk Climate, which helps folks kind of normalize the talking about climate, which can be kind of a controversial topic depending on who your friends and family are. And so if you're someone who's like a little nervous or a little squeamish to have these conversations with family or friends, but know that it's important, I'm always happy to talk through our toolkit and share that with you, or come back and give another presentation about the Nature Conservancy's Let's Talk Climate program, which really tries to normalize these conversations because we really can't fix what we're not talking about. So excited for that resource. The next is community actions. In our little matrix we had earlier. And there's a lot of things you can do within your community. So you can talk with your city council or city representatives about all sorts of different policies, including one called municipal electricity aggregation, which we're going to talk about in more depth in just a moment. But there's all sorts of policies that that can happen just at the city or town level. And so getting involved with your local town officials, or many towns have a green committee. I know Newport does. Here in Providence, I'm the chair of the Providence Environmental Sustainability Task Force. We work with our Office of Sustainability here in Providence to work on all sorts of local environmental and climate related initiatives. Newport has one. I think Aquidneck Island overall does. So getting involved in organizations like that can be a really helpful way to get involved. Support state and local climate champions. So you guys have great climate champions who are on the call right now. You can also talk to your local elected officials like your city council, your mayors, your town managers, as well as any local organizations that exist who you know are doing this type of work. You know, get involved with them, support them, show up to events, and just be physically present. contribute your voice and your opinions. You can join the Aquidneck Island Climate Caucus mailing list, and we'll have that link up in a little bit for you to see the mailing address for that. And so you can stay connected to the 3 representatives who hosted this call, as well as getting involved in the climate crisis campaign, which we're going to talk about a little more in just a few slides.
Yes, municipal aggregation, which has been brought up a couple of times. So the basics of what community choice electricity aggregation, also called municipal aggregation, is buying electricity in bulk on behalf of the residential and commercial electricity customers in the town. And that electricity is bought in bulk, so it can be cheaper and greener and go directly to all of the residents of the town. This is organized by, often it is approved by the town council and overseen by a town administrator or an office of sustainability if the town has one. So it gives residents and communities more local control over their electricity choices. Often you get more options too. In the electricity aggregations that Green Energy Consumers is involved with organizing, everyone in the town gets an option of either the basic default electricity option, which usually has about 10 to 25% more green electricity than the state mandates. You have the option to opt up to 100% green electricity, which is often cheaper than any other way to get 100% green electricity. Or if affordability is really, really important to you, you can drop down to the 0% additional green electricity, which will be a little bit cheaper. Although all of the green electricity default options tend to be comparable or less expensive than the utility basic service. And on the next slide, this little graphic that explains what I just described, all of these options that people would have under a municipal aggregation plan with their electricity. I need to mention that this was enabled by a law passed by Rep. Ruggiero in 2017. Other towns and states have had this option for a long time, but we really didn't have this option in Rhode Island until 2017. And over the last year, communities across Rhode Island have started adopting electricity aggregation, including Newport and Portsmouth in the last month, including yesterday. Portsmouth passed resolutions to start the aggregation process. Providence and Central Falls, their plans are currently before the Public Utilities Commission for approval. So this is moving, and if you don't already have, I don't know if this is a great time.
Oop. Kai, you cut out.
She's frozen.
Oops,
Sue.
she froze. Okay, I'll just continue on. But as Kai was saying, so a number of cities and towns across Rhode Island have already moved forward the process, including the ones you've seen here. And so folks are, live in Newport or Portsmouth. You guys are moving forward. If you live in one of the other communities, you have some conversations with your local leaders in front of you. I think Kai maybe lost connection, so I'll talk through the climate crisis campaign, but a number of advocates came together last year to create what we are calling the climate crisis campaign. So really recognizing that climate is like the most important issue of our time, and we really need to, oops, Kai just texted, she fell off, but she'll join back on in a sec. Sorry, her internet's it's a little wonky right now, but
I'm back. I'm so sorry about that.
No problem. I was just jumping in on the climate crisis campaign. Do you have enough bandwidth to pick it up, or do you want me to go?
You're doing an admirable job. I'll try, and if I drop out again, then you can take it over.
Sounds good. Go for it.
Great. So I heard Sue starting to talk about the importance of collective action. Rep. Ruggiero mentioned earlier that the Aquidneck Island Climate Caucus started in part because the representatives, our climate champions, were frustrated, like we as environmental advocates were, that environmental legislation the last couple of sessions has stalled in the House, especially. And climate advocates, we've been feeling the same way, and recognize the importance of Rhode Islanders calling upon their legislators and demonstrating through our collective voice the importance of climate policy to us as Rhode Islanders. The Climate Crisis Campaign is a little bit of organization of that movement. So we are coordinating other organizations and Rhode Islanders to call for climate action. Our goal is to bring in organizations that are not traditionally involved with the environmental movement, although of course a lot of our members are traditionally involved with the environmental movement. But some of our signatories include the City of Providence, which passed a resolution to endorse the Climate Crisis Campaign, the Catholic Diocese, the Latino Policy Institute, because as we know, the climate crisis touches all of us in so many different ways. It's not just an environmental issue, it's a public health issue. It is a socioeconomic issue. It is going to influence the future in so many different ways. So if you haven't already, you can sign on to the Climate Crisis Statement and join our campaign at the Rhode Island climatecrisis.org, our website. We have our work has slowed during the pandemic, certainly, because we were centered around doing kind of in-person work at the State House. But over this fall and this winter, we will be engaging the signees once again on ways to support climate action in Rhode Island.
I'll just add quickly to that, bringing all of these groups together, it was really impressive to have all of the environmental groups this last year say that their single biggest issue was the Act on Climate bill, which we mentioned earlier, to get mandatory enforceable greenhouse gas emissions in Rhode Island. The environmental community, it seems like it would be a very homogenous group. We're a very heterogeneous group. There's lots of different priorities and personalities, as you can imagine, but we all really came together to say that this was our primary and only focus. Showed up, the bill did have hearings in the House, or did have a hearing in the House, and just packed multiple rooms, like standing room only in both rooms, to testify in support of this. And the messaging was really consistent and really clear that this is something that needs to happen, and all groups were united on this. It's one of those issues that really just is intersectional. Like as Kai was saying, it affects our economy, it affects public health, it affects women, it affects men, it affects children. We're seeing areas of the state that are, hit hardest by COVID are the areas of the state with the worst air pollution due to, greenhouse gas emissions from the port and things like that. And so it's a really intersectional issue. And so it's something that we've all come together to support.
So you should probably get back to us about seeing if we can get some of the municipalities onto this campaign, as you have the City of Providence on. So you should touch base with us maybe, in the fall to see if we can get some resolutions passed to add of our cities and towns here.
Nice, thank you. That's wonderful. And last but not least, we wanted to leave you before Q&A with some resources that we've mentioned. So if you want to receive updates on the Aquidneck Island Climate Caucus, you can email the website or the email address that's here, aquidneckclimate@gmail.com. And that'll connect you with the 3 legislators who have hosted tonight and who are leading the charge in the House on climate issues. If you want to learn more about programs like municipal aggregation, electric cars, energy efficiency, or renewable energy, the Green Energy Consumers Alliance website is a great place to check out for some of those resources. And again, if you want to sign the Climate Crisis Statement or just learn more about the Climate Crisis Campaign, get on the mailing list, you can check out riclimatecrisis.org. And Kai and I are both always available for questions and discussion about climate and energy policy. And so both of our email addresses are available here. And we're happy to start taking any questions.
We have a question from Paul Marshall.
I can go video now. I had a question going back to the CCA stuff. First of all, I've been part of the process of that happening here in the city of Newport, and I don't think we're as far along as it was made out to be in this video. But I've been kind of wondering, I think the question resonates is that it makes sense. You're taking energy, you're putting renewable energy into the grid system here. Well, theoretically, you're not directly into the grid system, but you're applying for RECs. And you're incentivizing it by getting a set rate that could theoretically be lower than what the normal rate is. So you're trying to push this forward by offering residents cost savings. Is there a state level policy, and this might not be directed to Kai, it could be directed to some of our legislators here, that we should be pushing forward or writing where we can take the cost savings and not offer it to residents, but put it back into a municipality in order for a municipality to invest in renewable energies and build their own microgrids.
Terry, you want to take that one? You know a little bit about that, don't you? I think.
Terry, you
Muted.
can't hear you. Terry, you're muted.
Yes, I am not muted now, but what I know really is what the group that Nate Carpenter was trying to, so I don't know, I think you and I met with him, Lauren, pre-COVID. I don't really know how far along they are, but they were exploring that, setting up a municipal renewable energy plan. Deb, can you
I
weigh
would
in?
just jump in and say a couple of things, and then Kai can kind of talk more about the community choice aggregation or municipal aggregation. I think what you're saying, Paul, makes a lot of sense right now, because we just did this back in 2017, and I don't think it's had enough traction yet for cities and towns. I don't think enough people really even understand that communities can actually aggregate with all the businesses and people, and because there's an economies of scale, get such a lower cost of electricity. So I know the League of Cities and Towns supports this. So one of the things I would recommend is that maybe we do something, another one of these Zoom calls that's specific to that, but also using the League of Cities and Towns to mobilize their town administrators and their mayors to see the benefit of this, because I don't think there's enough traction just yet. And I think we have to kind of walk. And what you're talking about is a great sprint. I love it. But I'm wondering if we need to be, is that 2 or 3 years or 2 years down the road? Kai, can you talk to the fact that I think we need more, maybe a groundswell amongst communities so people understand the cost benefit, that they can still opt out and get their bill from National Grid if, Aunt Eleanor still wants to pay her National Grid bill and not do the economies of scale.
Yeah, I think Rep. Ruggiero is right that it's so new in Rhode Island. So when we're working with towns and communities, we often are introducing the simplest version of green municipal aggregation. However, what you are describing, Paul, is a lot more common in some parts of the country. For example, California has had community choice aggregation for a very long time, to the extent that it's either a plurality or majority of communities are now being served by municipal aggregations. In Massachusetts, the longest running municipal aggregation is called the Cape Light Compact, which has almost its own set of staff people. They have their own energy efficiency programs. So the longer that these are in place, the more creativity and bandwidth there is to develop creative things.
And how old is the Cape Light? Do you remember?
That began, I think, in the early 2000s.
Right, so that's a 20-year program.
I know, but we talk all the time about how the urgency of climate change, and I think that if we want to show anything, we want to have some progressive policy around it. And if being part of this process of introducing a CCA to Newport, it seems like we shouldn't be pitching it as a cost savings to the residents if we have the opportunity to build, this has to do through state policy, but the opportunity to potentially gain municipality revenue to be reinvested into bigger projects, renewable projects that could have so much more carbon reduction and climate change weight on it. Because we're just theoretically, I don't think people understand that we're buying RECs that aren't actually being put into the grid system that Newport's receiving.
I do want to say that I think that RECs are actually really, really great and are perhaps our most powerful tool to decarbonize the electricity system. What I would recommend as statewide policy would be the renewable energy standard, which is REC-based. RECs are how we account how much renewable energy goes into the grid in New England. Electrons go everywhere, so we can't know, if an electron comes from a solar panel in Newport, we can't say that that's going to houses in Newport.
No, absolutely. I'm not degrading RECs in any way. I'm just saying that if you have the opportunity to for a city and town to make its own microgrids on renewables using a cost saving like program like this. Why wouldn't you encourage municipalities to move forward with that direction over trying to sell it for residential savings?
Why are they mutually exclusive?
Well,
You
that's
know,
true too.
why
I mean,
not try to do both? You know, and to your point, Paul, because you're really spot on, sometimes writing a bill and putting it forth is really important, because what it means is you have a hearing, so people testify, and it's an opportunity, a forum to educate people on the whole process. And I'd say if you
Raise
have
the
some thoughts
issue.
and ideas, go forward with it. Where do you live? What's your community, Paul?
I live in Newport. I'm in.
So,
I was going to say
Lauren
that
Carson.
Paul and I have a meeting in the morning, and I'll give you some contact information for this gentleman, Nate Carpenter. You may want to talk to him. And then the other thing is that before everyone joined the call, we were discussing this particular issue, and we thought that maybe we would have a specific meeting with some representatives of the communities in the East Bay on this topic alone. So we'll see if we can make that happen and just really focus on this discussion.
Yeah, I think that's
And
great.
Tyre Sue, could you weigh in, just offer some comment on the state of the actual grid? Because that is something that I have heard and been asked about, and kind of ties in a little bit to what Paul is talking about. You know, is our grid up to, you know, letting us move forward at the pace that we would all like to move forward? Could you talk about that?
So Rhode Island is in the midst of grid modernization planning. I would say that one of the biggest problems with our grid, and it's not here yet, but it is coming, would be that we don't have the sensing technology or the substations, various grid infrastructure to handle a big jump up in electrified transportation and heating and distributed energy resources like solar. I think that it's actually a little ways off that we will get to the point where we're going to have to be curtailing, i.e. not using some of our solar energy because it's overloading the grid. It is something to be aware of though. So the National Grid has a grid modernization plan that it is going to be filing with the Public Utilities Commission this winter. I think it's not as big a problem as it has been made out to be over the past couple of years, but we do need to consider it. Microgrids are definitely a very exciting prospect. I think green energy consumers tends to think in kind of state level policy, especially because we are such a small state. We need to get it to a point where everywhere in Rhode Island is on renewable electricity and has a really strong modernized grid.
The only thing I'd add to that, Kai, I think that was perfect. The one thing I'll add, which is not particularly about grid mod, but harkens back to a point Kai made earlier about our offshore wind purchases. And it's just, as Paul was actually saying, you know, oh, this is a crisis, so everything has to happen so fast. And I think that's why it's so important that we act on these policies now, because the actually implementation takes a long time. Like it takes a little while to like get them up and running and working properly, and like get towns and cities to adopt them when that's relevant. And so passing state level legislation is important now. Like we can't wait for 2030 or 2050 to get some of these things through, because it takes time. It takes time to get steel in the ground. It takes time to get panels on your roofs. It takes time for these programs to work.
Raise the money to do it too.
Yeah, and to raise all the money.
I'm Dave Brown. Can you hear?
Yes.
Sorry, I'm showing you I'm not a robot. Anyway, I was thinking about a lot of this discussion is from the outside looking in and not from the inside looking out of a resident or a small business or a town leader. And what are the trade-offs? And those of us who need to run some numbers. And as you know, one of our RAB members, Tom Grieve, is sort of a doubting Tom, and he's always raising questions about things, but he's not trying to be an obstacle. He and I had quite a bit of time. So just this week, just yesterday, we were talking about electricity and alternatives. And should I take the offer? I had a card from some outfit that wanted me to shift from the National Grid offer. So I spent yesterday going online trying to look what's available in the state of Rhode Island, and I bookmarked about 20 of these things. And no, there's no one place where I can get the whole list of offers. And if you do have the offers, some of them are out of date. Quite a few are not recognized by National Grid Rhode Island. The renewables are on a separate page. And by the way, I was an original People's Power and Light board, technical board, so I'm not against you all. So I was thinking, if I wanted to go on this offer or change from my current one with you folks green, or to go up to a more renewable than I now have, is there a place I can look at the trade-offs on the costs? And answer is no, I couldn't find on the web any single source. Some commercial outfits have some parcel. The state has some pretty interesting things. They have a good list of tips, a list of guides of if you're thinking of changing it. And secondly, yesterday, Tom, I was looking at this thing about the trade-offs from the point of view of a town leader. I live in Middletown, he's in Portsmouth. A town leader about this community aggregation. And again, we're looking at, all right, suppose in the town, what are some examples of what are the rates towns have been able to get or might get? And if we spliced onto that as individuals, an idea will be paying more, how much more for the going renewable, that kind of thing. Again, I could not find any sites that have that. And the same applies to state legislation, bills. There's a tendency to put all sorts of add regulations. In fact, you ever see one of these bills? Well, the PFAS one, Terry, it's a good idea, but if you go through and there's all scratches and everything else, you have no idea what the main aim of the bill is. So having a summary paragraph at the beginning would help a lot. Some states, where my daughter is California, they have to do that. And then again, analyzing from within, if Terry's bill were passed, what would it mean for one of those small marina outfits right near you in Melville, in terms of new regulations or obligations, for example? What would it mean for some of our common men? Well, you get the idea. This, by the way, my background as an ag economist, and I used to be in extension work in Iowa, Texas, and Tennessee, and other places. And that's what we learned there. We were dealing with broad policy issues. We were going out and doing meetings, but we always found it was useful to look through the eyes of a cross section of real people. So maybe that's something you could add to your own efforts. Sorry, so long.
Thank you for the information.
That's a lot to unpack, Dave. Once again, you always do such a great grand policy assessment. But your point about municipal aggregation in Middletown considering it, or any town considering it, as we were talking before the program, you know, it starts with a town resolution, at least doing some work around it to see what it would be. And then they start the whole process of doing the diligence of finding the costs. And again, because it's the economies of scales, and because there will be public hearings so people will know exactly what the costs are and what other cities are doing. But I think to Lauren's point, to Rep. Carson's point, we should have one of these Zoom calls and maybe have the League of Cities and Towns and one of the towns that has done it, Kai, and talk about the benefit. I mean, it's really, we patent the entire piece of the statutes based on what Massachusetts did. We had a municipal aggregation bill in Rhode Island, but it was so poorly written and people had to opt in. And to your point, Dave, no one even understands how to do that. So if a town comes before you or a city and says, here's this great opportunity for businesses, small businesses, for residents to actually save on their electricity costs. And if you don't want to save, you can opt out. So that's the difference.
Can I add a quick thing? Dave, I think you raised some really amazing points, and my background's actually split between energy policy and food and ag policy, so I love that you were with Extension. They do such important work. I think your point at the beginning is a really spoke to me as like why municipal aggregation as a statewide policy that could be adopted by the municipalities is so important. So in Rhode Island, as well as in Massachusetts, the utilities don't own the supplies. They don't own the generation, like the power plants or the solar or whatever is generating the electrons. And so in Rhode Island, you get a bill from National Grid that has both, like, it's kind of split. I wish I had a slide on this right here, but it's split into two pieces. So the first piece is around distribution. So you can actually see it, like, in my thing here, some poles and wires. So National Grid owns all of those poles and wires, and that's actually how they make their money, by making investments in those poles and wires. The generation is actually for them just a pass through. So that's the second piece of your bill. It'll say supply, and that's the part where companies across Rhode Island, across the region, can be what we call competitive suppliers and bid to you like other rates. It'll still show up to you on your National Grid bill, but like it'll be supplied by another company. And a lot of those companies are kind of trying to sell you something, and it's very confusing. You get a lot of offers in the mail. They're very confusing. Some of them are good deals, some of them are not good deals, and it's hard to evaluate what's good for you and what's not. And they don't always have your best interest in mind, because they're trying to make some money off that competitive supply. And I know it's super confusing. My husband's a professor at Brown, surrounded by other professors at Brown who are very smart people, and they're always calling me or emailing me being like, I got this thing in the mail, is this a good deal? And I'm like, and so lots of people get so confused by it. And I think that's why municipal aggregation is so great, because it's something that's then vetted by your city council. It's something that's vetted by the state already. It's a policy that then would be blanket for the whole community and really aggregate everybody together, as opposed to this kind of like one-off people showing up at your door or sending you mailers or trying to confuse you. So the fact that it's so confusing really speaks to me about why municipal aggregation is such a great program. And I'm saying that also as someone who's a Green Energy Consumers member, and I buy my supply from them.
Yeah, I just wanted
Excellent
to say,
job. Excellent, Sue.
I wanted to say that we have been joined by June Speakman. She may be on your screen. And June is state
See her
representative
name.
for Bristol and Warren. So thank you, June, for joining us. We're almost at the
Thanks,
end.
June.
Glad you made it. We
Yeah,
have
sorry,
about 5
sorry
minutes.
I'm late. Sorry I'm late.
That's
It's
okay.
okay.
That's okay. Glad you're here.
Any other questions?
Does anybody else have any
Uh,
questions this evening?
Just
A
adding on to
fabulous
Sue's.
conversation.
Yes.
Can you hear?
Really, thank you. And I
Yeah.
think to Dave's point and others, and Paul, for your comments, you know, I thank you for joining us, and I'm really honored to be with my colleagues. You know, as both Sue and Kai pointed out, you know, we need more policy around transportation when it comes to the climate crisis, because it does account for 35% of those greenhouse emissions. And that's why we need you. You know, we need your support, your advocacy, your activism, and your ability to kind of empower us to put legislation forward. I mean, I meant it when I said that's the power of policy. It's all about community activism. And I mean, I'm looking at Doug Subetti. How many times have you come into the State House to testify on my renewable energy bills? And I could always count on him, you know, whether it was the Renewable Energy Standard or the REG bill. And then just 2019, last year, we talked about a consumer protection bill for homeowners, because once we carved out 2 megawatts from the renewable energy growth, everybody was putting solar panels. But you know, back in 2014, I think we had 5 solar companies in the state, and last year we had 52. Some are good, some are not so good. Doug is one of the best.
Yeah.
But we needed to make sure consumers were protected and not taken advantage of, because you don't know what you don't know. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Deb.
Thank you.
Good point. Good point.
On the community aggregation, just to add on to Sue's point, that's what we concluded yesterday when we were talking about this, Tom and I. And few people are going to, especially in COVID times, are going to have time to chase down all the offers. So having community aggregation, but a cynic in the town might say, well, how do we know you don't have a sweetheart contract with just one of these outfits? How do we even know you really scoped out the options and gotten a good price is point one. And then having some numbers for typical situations so that people can see how it would apply to them, a big business, little business, consumer, and so on. And hearings don't quite do that. They usually get sometimes the house is stacked. You may have an advocate or an opposing lawyer, right? And you need almost some work sessions. And we were thinking maybe you almost need a commission in towns to do, because town councils don't. That'd be a question for Linda tonight. Are you awake? Yeah. Do you have time to deal with these sales yourself, or would a commission dealing with community aggregation? It's sort of analogous, I was thinking, to waste, and I'm sorry to say this, but it's analogous to how do you have good management and selection of waste management outfits in a town? Would you agree that that might be, you need some of the same kind of selection process and then overlook?
I'm happy to talk. This is Linda Ujifuza. I'm on the Portsmouth Town Council. We discussed this last night, as a matter of fact, and I'm happy to take this offline with Dave to explain the process that was explained to us, because it might address a lot of your concerns, Dave. But yeah, we are moving forward with it.
Look into doing another Zoom for something.
Yes,
Dave.
and we will do another Zoom. What do you think, Rep Carson, Rep Cortvriend, perhaps on municipal aggregation?
That'd be a
And
great.
invite our colleagues like Rep Speakman and also
Yes.
Warwick, Warren, Bristol, all of East Bay, Barrington, and have a conversation. I know the League of Cities and Towns has talked about it themselves, amongst themselves, and have been very supportive of it. And that's important, because that's where a lot of the city managers, town managers, and mayors look to for guidance. To your point.
Right.
Good, Deb,
Thank
it's 8
you.
o'clock. You want to wrap up?
Yes.
Yes.
I just want to say thank you for inviting me. Thank you for being here. And again, Kai Salem, the policy coordinator for the Green Energy Consumer Alliance, and Sue AnderBois, Climate and Energy Program Manager for Nature Conservancy. It was just real pleasure. And I love your solar panels behind you that I know Doug Sabetti and Newport Solar put in. That's a great background. And now my colleagues.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to everybody. And we will have future events like this. We'll do them here on Zoom, or, soon, hopefully we can meet in person. But there's clearly more work to do, and I know that we're committed to it. So thank you, and have a wonderful evening.
Yes. I would just like to conclude that I'm sure all of us will be posting the recording, so those that couldn't join us can watch at their leisure. But certainly I'd like to get some feedback as to the right time of day that we should have these. Is the evening a good time? This is the first time we've tried this online. So we do want to have another one, which we've come up with an additional topic tonight, but I think our third speaking series prior to this evening was going to be on what actions people can take in their own homes and in their own day-to-day, as to how they could be, reduce their own footprints, like Sue and Kai were talking about, and what actions can individuals take to make an impact. And I'd like to thank you, ladies, Kai and Sue, as well, for joining us tonight and giving us such a wonderful presentation.
Thank you so much.
You all to coming.
Stay well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're more than welcome,
you.
everybody.